Today's lecture is on the servicescape and toward the intelligent use of space in service systems. When we deliver a service, it takes place in some environment that we've either built or designed to do so. That environment is often a physical, in-the-world landscape, but it can also be a cyber environment that's more abstract or a virtual world of some kind, which is why we use the word servicescape for both kinds of environments. Now, the environment in which the service is delivered shapes the expectations, behaviors, and experiences of the customer or users in general. And at the same time, it also influences the expectations, behaviors, and experiences of the people providing the service. And sometimes the customer or user can intervene, can interact in the environment, in the servicescape, to change the way the service is delivered or to improve the user experience. That's what I meant by making the servicescape more intelligent. So what's a servicescape? Servicescape is a term that was invented by Mary Jo Bittner, a big figure in service design research and literature. And she said that a servicescape is the environment in which the service is designed and implemented in a service system. We can design a servicescape to facilitate the enjoyment of the service, how much learning takes place, how much collaboration or cooperation takes place, how much innovation can take place, or how just efficient the service can be. But we can't get all these things at the same time. So we have to make choices about what we want to make the servicescape do the best. And sometimes a servicescape may be designed to achieve behaviors or objectives that might be undesirable from some stakeholders, as you'll see in a few minutes. Well, it's easy to recognize attractive servicescapes. This restaurant is designed, it's very inviting. It says, come here, have this really upscale aesthetic experience. It's just designed in a way to be very attractive and seductive. On the other hand, would you want to work in this servicescape? Unfortunately, some people have no choice but to work there. Or perhaps you'd rather work in a servicescape like this. This is taken from some probably Silicon Valley startup of some kind, where you've got open floor plan, cool lighting, lots of cool stuff for the people to do. So we can look at that kind of examples and say, let's abstract. What's the framework for understanding servicescapes? Well, servicescapes include the environment, and some of that's just the sort of physical conditions of the temperature, the air quality, the lighting, and so on. The space, how much space you have to do things in, how it's arranged. But it's also your perception of that environment. Do you feel crowded? Do you feel constrained? That may often not be actually the case, but you may feel that way. So there's these kind of influences that are both real and imagined that shape your behavior in the servicescape. So I urge you to look at this diagram more carefully to see that kind of analysis. But again, if we look at this, we can imagine if we have a very noisy room, a room that has bad odor from the sewage plant next door, a room that's full of smoke, it's going to have an obvious impact on the quality of your experience. If you have very unattractive furniture, discarded old style equipment, dirty, torn curtains and so on, it won't feel very engaging and very motivating. If it's, can you find your way around that environment? Is it easy to get lost? Okay. Do you feel reassured when you're in the environment? Many service providers like to hang diplomas or other evidence about their qualifications. And so when you go into a doctor's office, do you look and see where the doctor got his or her medical training? I know I do. Okay, I don't want to go to a doctor that got a degree in correspondence school. I want to actually have hands-on practice with doing medicine. So, the way in which you decorate your office or your dorm room or your apartment conveys a lot about the identity and the way people will interact with you, because you're saying something about the way in which you're going to deal with them. Now, we can shape your behavior a lot by this. So I can make you want to come someplace by making it a very attractive place. I can make you want to go away by making it unattractive. So the problem is that, of course, sometimes you want to attract some people and discourage other people. So you have to be very careful about how you design that, because perceptions of the servicescape will differ between different people and different customer segments. There's a very interesting product called the Mosquito. The Mosquito is a speaker that produces a very high frequency buzz, like the sound of an insect, the mosquito that it's aimed after, that mostly can be heard by young people. People like me at my age, their hearing is gone bad from too many years listening to Led Zeppelin and other loud rock music, that I can't hear that sound. So it makes you uncomfortable when you're around that place. They don't want you to loiter around the outside of the store, so they have the mosquito buzzing away. Or even worse, they'll play classical music or some other music that you don't like to make you go away. So here we are trying to create an environment which discourages you from wanting to interact in the servicescape. Now, again, some aspects of this are kind of more intuitive, but there's actually a lot of science around servicescape design, in particular around the science of waiting. We know a lot about waiting time, both kind of understanding the mathematics of waiting, as you'll see in a bit, but also the psychology of waiting. It turns out that people are more influenced by the perceived waiting time than the actual waiting time. Sometimes people go to a service system expecting to wait. So if you expect to have to wait and you only wait a little bit, you might not feel like you waited at all. People feel that time that's filled with some activity is shorter than unoccupied time, which is why instead of speeding up the elevator, because it takes too long for the elevator to come, we'll put mirrors outside the elevator. People will then spend time preening in front of the elevator and won't realize that they're waiting a minute for the elevator to show up. If you explain the waiting time, people perceive that as fair than having an uncertainty about the wait. So you'll often see signs like taking a number than what the current person being served is, so you can kind of count down to your time to be served. And if it sounds fair, it will seem perceived to be shorter than if it seems unfair. So if you see people cutting in line, you'll feel that you waited too long, even if it didn't really affect materially the length of time you had to wait for the service. So there's kind of a perception of what's fair and what's unfair. So you might, for example, if you were in a service establishment and you see the employees, some employees that are on break hanging out, and you can be visible from where the customers sit, you'll feel that that's unfair. Why isn't that person helping me? So it's important not to have that employee be visible to the person being served. But you'll wait longer for things that you think are valuable. You'll wait longer to get into the fancy restaurant or nightclub than you will to get into, McDonald's. You don't think you should wait for McDonald's. You should just go in there and get served and be out. And finally, waiting will always seem longer when you're by yourself than when you're in a group, which is why sometimes service providers try to encourage the people waiting to interact with each other by the layout of the waiting area, for example. But again, that's some of the qualitative or psychological dimensions of waiting. There's also a great deal of mathematics of waiting, and this is called queuing theory. And we can analyze the waiting structure, the locations of the lines or the queues to get served in a service system like a bank or some other establishment like that, the Department of Motor Vehicles or something like that. And we can analyze mathematically the impact of different kinds of layouts and decision rules. So the queue configuration is the description of the number of queues, their locations, and their layout. And you can see here we take a number of queues, we have single queues, we have multiple queues, we have queues that can get arbitrarily long, or they have other ways to manage the queues. We could let people change lines, or they may be prohibited from changing lines. We have express lanes, different kinds of configurations that shape your experience. There's also something called the queue discipline, which is the policy for which the person is selected from the queue, the next customer who gets served. The most common queue discipline is FCFS. What is that? It's first come, first served. That's a fair kind of queuing model. It says that the person who has been next in line should get served next. But that isn't always the case. I mean, you may have a queue discipline based on different kinds of customers. So you may have, in fact, different queues, each of which has a first come, first served. But you may have the express lane for fewer than 10 people. You may have the preferred travel lane at the airport where you don't have to go through the strip search of the TSA, for example. So there may be different kinds of queues with different policies for choosing customers. There's a very particular word used in hospital emergency rooms for the queue discipline, which selects customers from the queue in the waiting area based on how likely they are to benefit from the service or how likely they are to die if they don't get it. And that's called triage. So the customer which most needs the service cuts to the front of the line in the emergency room, which kind of makes sense. Another aspect of service-scape design is wayfinding and orientation. How do you help people find their way through the environment? Some environments are very well designed with lots of landmarks or signage or differentiation, maybe different colors on the floors or the walls or things like that to help you understand different buildings, to help you know where you are. Other buildings may be much less well designed, or maybe intentionally designed to make it hard to find your way. So if I think, say, the BART system in the Bay Area, I can look and I see lots of evidence that we're trying to help people find their way. We have signs on the street showing you where the BART stations are. We have maps. We have displays that say what the next train is and so on. These are all ways to help you understand how best to interact in the BART service system. But sometimes, signs don't help because they're just not very good signs. Here's a collection of really bizarre signs that the customer, or in this case, whoever the person trying to make sense of this service system of the street map, would have a hard time making sense of this. And again, there are some environments where that's intentional. If you've ever, if you could imagine comparing, say, a hospital where you have a need to get people in and out and to find the appropriate service point quickly and efficiently with a casino. Casinos, for example, want people to go in there and get lost and never come out, that they spend more money that way. So casinos have no clocks, have no windows, have lots of clutter, and you have to walk through the army of slot machines to get to any place else in the casino. Hey, one important concept in organizing a service space is how the resources are organized logically. One way to organize things is often taxonomic. Taxonomic classification means that we've organized the parts of the service environment, let's say a supermarket, let's say, in some way which reflects characteristics of the resources themselves. So I could organize food in different sections like meat, dairy products, cereal, vegetables, and so on, and further decompose that within each of those sections. And that's sort of a logical classification of food that could be manifested in my supermarket. But alternatively, we could organize things not on taxonomic basis, but on what we call taskonomic basis, which organizes things on the basis of their purpose or their activity structure. So we put things together that are used together. So a cook might organize 3 different work areas in the kitchen: a preparation area where you'd have your knives to cut things up, your cutting boards; the oven area where you need things that would go to put things in the oven; and then a stove area where you have things that you use on the stove top. Now, grocery stores have a limited amount of this taskonomic classification. Next time you go in a store, look and see that you may have the snacks. The potato chips and pretzel may be close to the beer aisle. The candles may be close to the cake mix. Even though they don't have taxonomic properties in common, they have taskonomic properties in common. Well, taskonomy is just one example of the intelligent use of space where we've oriented the resource and the service system to make things smarter in some ways. So by putting these together that go together, we are able to make the work, we were able to reorganize the workplace to enhance our interactions in it. And there's a really interesting paper by David Kirst of UC San Diego's Cognitive Science Department called The Intelligent Use of Space that I think is just brilliant in this area. It basically talks about how we can use the physics of the world, in a sense, the way that objects wear out over time, let's say, or to acquire wear indications to help us understand what we're doing. We can see that that's the thing we used a lot. And we use that as a way to organize the things for the task. Or we can organize things like we saw in the kitchen, organizing space to simplify our memory demands, to simplify how we can see things, to make it easier to do computations about calculations. So a kind of a fanciful example is playing cards. So suppose you're playing gin rummy and you're sorting the cards as you're playing the game. Here are two possible ways that the card player might have organized those cards in front of him. Well, if you look at the top row, they're not very well organized, and it would be hard to know whether the next card that you see is going to help you win the game or not. Whereas the cards below are organized in such a way that it's immediately obvious whether the next card is going to help you. And you can tell that you've almost won here, and the next card is going to probably help you win. So this, again, is a sort of a silly example in some sense because it's not really think of card playing as service design, but it indicates the idea that you can, in fact, intervene in your environment and reorganize the resource you're working with to make it easier to achieve some kind of goal. So let me conclude. This servicescape is this concept that for describing the environment in which a service is delivered, and as the word is intentionally general enough to apply to both physical landscapes and information landscapes or digital landscapes or virtual environments. We can use wayfinding orientation to help us, but it's maybe better to think that we should just try to make things simpler and smarter, where less help is needed. Make it easier to do the right thing by not having confusing displays or too much complexity of choice, especially in self-service content where there's not a person there to help you out. Or we should encourage people to plan or provide some ways to personalize their service experience with more context-aware help, or otherwise enable them to rearrange things that will help them achieve their particular goals in the service system. Okay, so that's it for today. See you next time.